Good morning. I am Councillor Eddie Adam, Chair of the Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to the remote meeting of the Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, taking place on the 3rd of September 2020, which has been recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to be viewed for a maximum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from the meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts. I would like to give a warm welcome to members, officers, and any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business of the agenda, I would like to cover some housekeeping rules for all of us to follow. As indicated earlier, please mute your microphone throughout unless you wish to speak. If you want to speak, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen and type in RTS, which is the request to speak. Remember, everyone in the meeting can see the messages in the chat function. It is not a private messaging service. When invited to speak, remember to unmute your microphone. Once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and your position, unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If you have any issues with connectivity, try switching off your video and just use the microphone function. If connectivity issues continue, you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin to get a better signal. If my connection is lost, the Vice Chair, Councillor Olga Milburn, will take over until my connection is restored. Hope that is clear for everyone. Moving on to the formal agenda then. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Paula?
It's Jackie, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillors Hawley, Higgins, Manchester and Sexton and Mrs Pat Holding.
Thank you. Moving on to item 2, substitute members. Do you have any substitutes?
We have Councillor Malcolm Clark for Richard Manchester.
Thank you. Welcome, Malcolm. Item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 9th and the 16th of March. You'll find them on pages 3 to 24 on your agenda. Firstly, can we agree the minutes from the meeting on the 9th of March?
Agreed.
Yeah. Any matters arising? No matters arising. Yeah. As I've received no requests to speak, members have agreed the minutes of the 9th. Can we agree the minutes of the 16th of March? Thank you. Any matters arising? I've received no requests to speak. Members therefore have agreed the minutes of the 16th of March. Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to note? I have no messages to say otherwise. If there is anything further in the agenda, please make sure you raise the point at that time. Item 5 then. Any items from co-opted members or interested parties? Nothing at this moment in time. Again, I've had no indication of that. Okay, then moving on to item number 6, the main items on the agenda. And item 6 is the response of neighbourhoods and climate change to the coronavirus pandemic. This morning we have Alan Patrickson, Corporate Director of Neighbourhoods and Climate Change. And also in support we have Brian Buckley, Strategic Highways Manager. They will present the report with a presentation on the screen. You will find on pages 25 to 58 of the agenda if you need to make reference. So it's over to Alan Patrickson. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much, Chair. It really is a pleasure to be presenting to the committee in my role as Corporate Director for Neighbourhoods and Climate Change. This is my first presentation to the committee since the new directorate was established. And it's worth remembering, of course, that Neighbourhoods and Climate Change came together as a directorate in early April, which was right in the middle of the pandemic. So it's been quite a start for the new team. We've certainly had a lot to be thinking about and a lot to be doing. And I'll be sharing some of that with you now in the presentation. So I'll see if I can successfully get the presentation on screen. Okay, could somebody just confirm that the presentation's on screen, please? Yep, good, thank you very much, thank you. I think one of the things I'd just like to say before I move into the detail of the service response to the pandemic is really to emphasise, I think, that the response of the council, and in particular the staff of the council, and also the partners and contractors that we work with throughout the pandemic, really has been something that as an organisation we can be rightly proud of. I think people have come together in an incredible way to work to resolve problems and to keep vital services going, and in some cases to create, design and deliver some brand new services that we needed to in response to the pandemic very, very quickly. I think our staff have been incredible, our partners have been incredible, working with trade unions who've also been fantastic in terms of helping staff take on new roles, do new things and change entirely, in some cases, the way they have to work in response to the pandemic. That said, I'll move on to some of the detail of the things that we had to do during the pandemic to keep services going, and some of the things that we could do and couldn't do, and how we responded to that. The structure of the presentation, as you'll have already seen if you've seen the slides, is to go through each one of the main service areas of neighbourhoods and climate change, just point out some of the things that we had to deal with, some of the solutions that we came up with, what effect that had on the services and the public, and any issues that may have come out of that. So starting with environmental services, and of course, you know, the biggest service that we have here is our refuse and recycling service. It collects from 250,000 households every week. It was clear as we came into the pandemic that we needed to make sure that our fundamental refuse and, if possible, our recycling services remained in operation. This was clearly very, very important. What we couldn't allow around the county was the build-up of waste in people's properties. We had to be able to take that away to help with the pandemic. Clearly, it would become a public health issue in itself if we weren't able to pick up refuse. And also, of course, we tried our very best to maintain our recycling services at the same time. So it was a very early job to make sure that we could put all of our effort and all of our resources into making sure these vital services maintained. As we worked through the planning for this, we realised that in terms of doorstep collection, we would be able to maintain both refuse and recycling services in a manner that, importantly, was safe to staff and that could be delivered across the whole county on the normal timetable. But we would have to do that slightly differently. As members will be aware, refuse and recycling crews normally work 3 to a vehicle with 3 in a cab. Clearly, working with social distancing, that was something that we had to look at. We couldn't work with staff in that close proximity in the cab. We took an awful lot of public health advice, looked at face coverings, looked at ventilation in the cab and making sure that people could stay socially distanced as much as possible. And what we came up with was a system where once we applied all of our resources, all of our vehicles, including those vehicles that would normally be used for garden waste, we were able to keep refuse and recycling services going. We were planning for a significant drop-off in staff availability. In the early days, we were really planning for a significant number of staff being absent, either sick themselves with coronavirus or with significant caring responsibilities for others. And as part of the council's corporate response in terms of redeploying staff, we redeployed quite a number of staff into refuse and recycling to help with loading, principally, because we needed the drivers to be trained. So a number of the loaders for refuse and recycling came from other parts of the council, including leisure services and some others. So by doing that, we managed to keep refuse and recycling going right the way through. Of course, collecting the bins and emptying the bins is one part of it. We needed also to make sure that we had somewhere to take the materials that we collected. In this respect, we were in daily contact with Suez, who are the contractor who take our refuse down to the EFW plant on Teesside, making sure that they were still operational, that they had their plans in place, and that we had a consistent supply chain. On our doorstep recycling, we work with a company called Biffa in Washington, who have been our contractor also for some years now, working very, very closely with them to make sure that the recycling that we collected could be taken to their facility and could be recycled. The recycling supply chain can be quite complex. There's a number of different people involved. Once the materials have been sorted, they go to a number of different places. And that supply chain has been disrupted by coronavirus. As you would imagine, each one of those companies in that supply chain need to make sure that their staff are safe and their operating practices are safe. And many of those operating practices are in a factory type environment, almost a manufacturing type environment. So there has been some difficulties for ourselves and for our subcontractors in terms of recycling, but we have managed to keep a good service going through the period. So as I said, we kept refuse and recycling doorstep collections going by deploying all of our resources into that, including the resources that would normally be used for garden waste at this time of year. So one of the things we looked at through March and then into April, we suspended the garden waste service. We couldn't start it on the regular start date because of this issue. But the team's got their heads together to say, well, can we deliver garden waste through the 2020 season? In March, this was looking like something that we might not be able to deliver. We weren't sure whether we'd have resources to do that. But by the time we got through to April, the guys had put their heads together and come up with a plan to utilise vehicles on Saturdays and Mondays when the regular collections aren't operating. Obviously, our regular collections operate Tuesday to Friday. So that we could operate a garden waste service if we reorganised the rounds so that people's collections would either be on a Saturday or a Monday. We would then redeploy the same vehicles and redeploy staff into those collection services. So we launched that, I think, towards the end of April. There was an awful lot of customers, of course, of this service that we needed to communicate with. It's a paid for service, of course, so we have to bear that in mind as well. This is slightly different to the rest of our waste services. People do pay for this service. What we found, as members will be aware now that we're in September, is that the garden waste services run since then on the Saturday and the Monday schedules. People generally have welcomed this. During the lockdown period, there was an awful lot of gardening went on. If you remember, it was very good weather while people were at home, and there was a lot of garden waste produced. So we did offer that if people couldn't use the Saturday and Monday service, that they could have refunds. We've had very, very small numbers of refunds, but since we've reinstated the service to Saturday and Monday, we've had an awful lot of extra people sign up for that garden waste service, so it's clearly very successful. We've recently sent out letters to let people know how that is going to operate for the rest of the year. The original communication out to people really only went up to August because, again, we just weren't sure as to how things were going to go. And we've now written to people to confirm that we can continue garden waste collections to the end of the season, at the end of November, and then we'll carry over any missed collections due to the gap in service in April, and we'll add those on into the 2021 season for customers who renew. Clearly, internally, our refuse and recycling services need a lot of support from fleet maintenance and from back office support. We managed to keep this going all the way through. Our fleet workshops were open all the way through, again on socially distanced new working methods. And we were very successful in keeping all of our vehicles on the road throughout this period. In terms of our household waste recycling centre service, this was a service that again was suspended in March and all of the recycling centres closed. We simply couldn't operate recycling centres under the conditions of the coronavirus regulations that came out in March. Not only that, of course, but the coronavirus regulations were very specific around reasons for people to be leaving the home. And they were simply to make sure that they had food and other vital supplies and for an hour a day's exercise. So visiting the household waste recycling centre to get rid of rubbish simply didn't fall into those categories. So it was essential that we closed those to comply with the regulations. As time went on, we worked with H.W. Martin's, our contractor for the HWRCs. We wanted to get ready as best as we could because we knew that we would be reopening at some point. H.W. Martin's had the same issue with supply chain as we did for our doorstep collection, is that a lot of their supply chain weren't operating in themselves. We also had to look very, very carefully at the way the recycling centres operated themselves to make sure that customers would feel safe and customers could exercise social distancing on some of the sites, some of which are quite small and some of which are quite tight. And under normal circumstances, people work together quite closely to empty the waste out of their cars. We did come up with a plan, and we did come up with a plan of action, which by the time we got through to May, on the 13th of May, there was an amendment to the coronavirus regulations, which did allow people to go to the recycling centres to dispose of waste that was accumulating in their homes. So it did take until May before the regulations were amended to allow us to reopen the sites. From recollection, I think the 13th of May was Tuesday, and by the 18th, which I think was the following Monday, maybe perhaps Tuesday, the recycling centres were open again. We had seen some of the other councils that had gone a little bit early with recycling centre opening had significant issues with traffic management, so we were very careful with that. Of course, we have a number of sites across the county and a number of different arrangements in terms of access. And even now in September, some of our busiest sites, including Potter House and Anfield Plain, have still got traffic management arrangements in there to make sure that people can access the sites as safely as possible and that we're not interfering with the highway. We are now looking at, as you would imagine, some forward planning to plan for a bit of a return to more normal operations at the sites. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we are certainly doing some planning and some trials on some of our larger sites as to how we might remove the zonal operation that's in there at the minute, which is designed to help social distancing. And at such time that it's safe to do so, we do have those plans in place now, and we'll be doing some trials as to how we can get the recycling centres back to normal. There's just a little note on the bottom of this slide as well around the partnership work that we've been doing with other councils in the region, looking at the future of our residual waste treatment. Our contract with Suez is up in 2025. These are significant contracts that take an awful lot of planning. And we've now got in partnership with 6 other authorities, including Newcastle City and some of the Tees Valley authorities, to look at a joint procurement post 2025. And even through lockdown, we were working on that project with other councils, and you may have seen that we've released an ODU notice for that project recently, and that is now, it's going to be a very good project in terms of partnership working, and it will give us security well into the middle of the century in terms of our residual waste disposal. So moving on, parks and open spaces, our clean and green teams. Again, this was a big issue for us during full lockdown in March and April. There were some decisions to be made regarding parks and open spaces, regarding grounds maintenance. We chose to keep all of our parks open and as much as possible our open spaces open, although the play parks and play equipment was closed down. We tried to keep parks open and keep them serviced, including litter bins and dog waste bins, because clearly during the lockdown period in March and early April, people were only allowed out of the home for a short period of time to get the exercise that they needed, and we wanted to make sure that our parks, green spaces and open spaces were there for them to use to get that exercise that they needed. So we did try and keep a service going there, albeit slightly scaled back. We did keep grounds maintenance going. We did some grass cutting, and we did service the litter bins in the parks. And we made sure as far as possible that the area was kept tidy. In terms of the planting, we clearly had an awful lot of winter bedding plants that we had been planning to put out in the spring. That schedule got slightly knocked back, but then as time went on and we developed safe working practices for the horticultural staff, we came on the idea of using some of that bedding to provide a little lift into the community and provide some floral tributes. These were very quickly done, but very appreciated, I think, by certainly by the people that saw them and by the people that they were supporting. We're now in a position where we are unrolling an awful lot of that in terms of getting back to normal. We've risk assessed all of our play areas, and all of our play areas were open again by the end of July. We now have our playing pitches once again are reopening, and we're now going through a process of risk assessing and opening the associated pavilions with the play parks, and we have other areas. The historical site at Binchester has now reopened. So our focus here is very much on getting things back as much as possible to business as usual. It's not quite business as usual. Some of our play areas, we've removed some of the equipment to help with social distancing, and also we've put an awful lot of signage up. But we have got through that period now, and much of our grounds maintenance is back to normal. We had, I think that we'll call this slide pulling together. There was a lot of our other environmental services that we had to keep going, that were working under very, very unusual and in some cases very pressurized circumstances. One of those was our bereavement services. We did an awful lot of planning for bereavement services for obvious reasons during the pandemic. And there were some real changes that we had to make in that part of our service area in terms of our interface with the public and in terms of our interface with the health service and with public health. We planned this very carefully. At one point when we were looking at worst case scenarios, we did feel that our resources would be very, very stretched. And we were monitoring progress very carefully to make sure that we wouldn't find ourselves in a difficult position there. And as part of that, we had an awful lot of volunteers went into that service from other areas of the council. Now, clearly, it's not a part of our world that is suitable for everyone, and not everyone is well suited to that type of work. It can be very sensitive. But we had great support from volunteers around the organisation and staff that were redeployed into that particular area to make sure that we could deliver a good and sensitive service there. Our neighbourhood wardens were redeployed in many different areas. We couldn't maintain the warden service as it had been, again, social distancing reasons, the number of staff that were generally in cars and vans working together. Neighbourhood wardens normally work in twos to a vehicle. We couldn't find safe ways to do a lot of the normal work that wardens did, albeit that we tried to keep on top of the environmental issues as much as we possibly could. But wardens were redeployed all over the place. They were redeployed in traffic management for the household waste recycling centres. They helped with the community hub that I'll mention a little bit later in terms of food deliveries to the most vulnerable, and indeed they went into bereavement services as well. We did see volunteers from all over the place. We had the redeployment process that we had corporately helped us to take resources from those services where we couldn't work at full capacity and really help us put them into those areas where we needed them on the front line. And there were some unexpected consequences of lockdown, and in many ways, part of the, one of the features of lockdown was that we saw an awful lot more birds in the trees, and we saw an awful lot more animals. But also the other side of that is that we also had an awful lot of calls into pest control because of some of the animals that were seen. So we had a very busy time in pest control again. Redeployed staff were put into there. Just a little note on that slide as well, that many of the other projects, not so much frontline services, but we have an awful lot of work going on in terms of our climate change emergency response plan. We have many projects, some of which have got European or national funding that we have been progressing in the background. You know, this is such an important agenda that we certainly didn't put our tools down on this. Many of our staff working from home, of course, and many of the people that they were interfacing with, contractors and funders working from home. But that project work still went ahead, and we're now reaping some of the benefits of that now that we can start that work on the ground. So there was certainly no let up in those sort of issues. So just moving on to our community protection services. This was such an important part of our coronavirus response. In community protection, we have a number of areas where we were looking at deploying staff in terms of the coronavirus response support. Clearly, our environmental health officers were very busy at this time, working very closely with colleagues in public health. Outbreak and infection control is something that the environmental health officers do as part of their day-to-day business. But of course, nothing on the scale of this has ever been seen before. This was a national effort and public health effort, and our environmental health officers really played a strong part in that, but a very local on the ground part of that as well. So we were working very strongly in support of public health and in support of local businesses and providing advice. Very often we set up a coronavirus advice line where members of the public or businesses could call in for advice. The coronavirus regulations were written very quickly and very bluntly in some ways to manage the lockdown. And of course, there were many questions around that needed answering. Not all of those questions had immediate answers, and we were really working through with public health some of those questions on the environmental health issues as we went through. But support to communities and support to businesses was something that we gave. As well as the environmental health side, of course, we do have trading standards in community protection, and they too were responsible for not only helping businesses but also providing a little bit of enforcement for those businesses that wouldn't comply with coronavirus regulations. We had some very small numbers in County Durham. I'm very pleased to say there was very high levels of compliance in our county, and most of the time we really got through with a little bit of advice to people if people weren't really adhering in ways that they should have been. A little bit of advice really generally went a long way. More recently, as we come out of lockdown, our environmental health officers are again working very closely with Public Health England and our local public health service to manage the local outbreak control. So we have our outbreak control plan now that through Public Health is published and is ready to go. And has been put into operation a couple of times recently, and our environmental health people are really in support of that. So some of the things we got involved with during the pandemic from community protection, on the health side, we were certainly looking at premises that were open, premises that should be open, and premises that shouldn't be open. There was, as I said, it wasn't always clear to everyone the kind of premises that could be open. And just as an example of that, when we got to the point where hardware stores could be open in case anyone needed to do some emergency works on their home, that did include the likes of B&Q, which also supplied garden supplies. So some of the garden centres then thought, well, perhaps that includes us because we also provide those sort of supplies, but actually garden centres couldn't open. So for a while, we were in communication with a lot of our local garden centres, just clarifying when they could and when they couldn't open. And really, once they could open, really helping them do that in a safe way. So that was the kind of advice that where we really had to look at what the regulations were allowing, what they weren't allowing, and what our role was in regulation there. It was very much about advice. We did have to issue some notices, but very small in numbers, as I've already said. Generally, businesses were compliant and very appreciative of the advice that we gave them. We did have some ASB, antisocial behaviour, some nuisance calls during this time. There was some noise issues that we had to address. I think one of the things around a lot of the issues that we dealt with in this area was there was two things going on. I think one, people were very concerned that people should be compliant with the regulations, and we got a number of reports where people were concerned that they didn't think the regulations were being complied with. And also, I think because during lockdown, everything was so still and everything was so quiet, we did see perhaps an increased sensitivity to some of these issues alongside the concern with the virus. So we did have some complaints around noise. The other one that we had was smoke from bonfires. And of course, a lot of gardeners collecting in their garden waste we're using bonfires to dispose of that, with the recycling centres not being open, and also with the temporary cessation of garden waste collection. So we did have some bonfires to deal with. Unauthorised encampments. There was some unauthorised encampments around the county. We did make preparation for the usual movement of travellers through the county towards Appleby. Appleby was cancelled, and as part of the response to the regulations, we did have to close our overnight emergency encampment. So we did have some unauthorised encampments to deal with. Generally, this was quite low level during lockdown, but we did have some issues to deal with there during the pandemic. Business support, I've talked a lot about that already. We did provide a lot of advice into businesses, and that includes the licence trade as well. When it came to at the start of July, when we were reopening pubs and reopening licensed premises, our licensing team were very much a part of that in helping them do that. And community resilience in terms of our outbreak control. A lot of work going on there, again, as I've mentioned, in partnership with Public Health and with Public Health England. Excuse me. So just moving on to technical services. Technical services, we took the decision in March at the start of lockdown to suspend all but the most emergency critical, time critical services for our highways teams. So we ceased all work on general maintenance, we ceased all work on general construction works, and we really just kept anything that was an emergency response to, for example, a street lighting column being knocked down or a road traffic accident or something like that, emergency repairs. And we did that really because of the complexity and the nature of the work, the construction work that we did, or we do, through our highway services teams and through our technical services teams. It felt that we needed to be able to review that work, take some time to do that, and really make sure that we weren't rushing into putting staff at risk by not having our safe working practices in place. Of course, there was a kind of double-edged sword to this, because during March, in the first few weeks of lockdown, there was no traffic on the roads, and of course it would have been the absolute ideal time to get out there and do some work on the highway, which we did recognise very much. And as you can imagine, our highways teams were very keen to get out there and do work when there was so little traffic around. But we did take the view that we needed to make sure that was safe. So when lockdown was announced at the end of March, we worked with the teams and worked with trade unions, and what we said was that we would review that at the first 3-weekly review point for lockdown. If you remember, when the coronavirus regulations were introduced, there was a 3-weekly rolling review of those. And we took the view that for 3 weeks from lockdown, we would suspend all but emergency highway services. Sorry. There we go. Sorry, my screen just froze for a minute. Could someone confirm that you can see a slide saying health and safety implications, please? Thank you very much. Thanks. That's great. My screen just froze for a minute. I wasn't sure if you were seeing what I was seeing. Thanks. So these are some of the things that we really had to work with during that time. We had to look at social distancing measures. Of course, as you can imagine, our highway crews, a lot of the work that they do, be it resurfacing or white lining or anything on street lighting, they work very closely together. They travel together to sites in the vehicles. And we wanted to make sure that we had all of that covered in terms of our risk assessments. We were looking at face coverings for highway workers during travel, many weeks before the general acceptance of face coverings. It was for staff an extra piece. It wasn't an official piece of PPE, but it was certainly an extra piece of protection that they could use while traveling in particular. We were also concerned at the time that, of course, once we restarted our highway works, that our staff would be very visible. Working on the highway is a very, very visible activity. So we did get some new signage made up just to give people the comfort that the people that they were seeing on the road were Durham County Council employees, that we did have appropriate risk assessments in place, and that the works that they were delivering were essential highway works around the county. So we had those signs made up just to give a little bit of public reassurance that the works were absolutely safe and absolutely assessed. So in terms of getting back to work in highway services, we did a huge amount of work with health and safety, a huge amount of work with trade unions. We produced new toolbox talks, and we did an awful lot of training before we started getting people back to work. We put people back to work in a very staged manner in this part of the teams. We started with work where people were obviously working either alone or in pairs, and that we could do that very safely, and then gradually moved on to some of the more complex projects. So we started with street lighting, and we made sure that street lighting maintenance could be done in a safe and secure manner. And then as we moved into April and through to the end of April, we started with some other highway works around particularly road surfacing and white lining. These were great projects to get going on because traffic was and still is light, and we actually rescheduled some of the works in areas where traffic management would have been complex, just to take advantage of that fact as we went through. So we looked at white lining, we looked at cat's eyes replacement, we looked at getting the gully cleansers out there, and we looked at street lighting maintenance. Latterly, and sort of last on our list, was the building and structures maintenance and the work that we were doing on building and structures, simply because there were so many more complex operations in those areas that we wanted to take the time to make sure we got that exactly right. Where we are now is we are pretty much back to work fully on the highways programme. The highways programme obviously took that 3-week delay to it because of coronavirus, but we are now very much back up and running, and we are very much delivering the major schemes that we need to through our highways teams. So just a quick look at some of the major works that we've got ongoing at the minute. I won't spend too much time on this, but it's just interesting to see the scale of some of the works ongoing. Junction 61 at Bowburn, that's a major piece of work on the A1M interchange. That work, we carried on doing a lot of work on that project through the lockdown. It was work that we could do safely. It was a lot of white lining type work. There was this project had been well developed before the pandemic hit, and that now is moving towards reopening. New Elvet Bridge, of course, is a project that has been in the pipeline for a long time. It was particularly difficult in terms of timing because we had to start this work as soon as we possibly could, which really meant doing the work now, doing the works this spring. We started the work in April, and of course there's no good time to close a bridge in the middle of Durham City, but putting that together with pandemic recovery means that it is difficult timing, but really given the essential nature of this huge piece of maintenance that we need to do on the joints of the bridge, we couldn't delay it any further. So that work is now underway in the city. Another bridge project that we've got is Witton Park Bridge. This is a road bridge that goes under the railway viaduct at Witton Park. This has been closed for some time, and we're now working on full deck replacement on that project. That's another really good project for us. A project that's approaching completion is the deculverting of the burn at Chesterley Street. This provides some real essential flood protection to some of the properties in Chesterley Street, and also reshapes the marketplace in Chesterley Street. This is a job that's mainly been subcontracted to one of our local subcontractors, one of our contractors, and it has been safely managed under the COVID-19 restrictions through their safe working practices rather than ours, although we have, of course, been making sure that we are content with the operating practices they have in place. Nearing completion, that project, really good project. Some of the other work that our highway services teams got involved with, one of the main ones, we had an awful lot of highway services drivers who volunteered to go into the PPE distribution cell. The PPE distribution cell was set up at Chiltern Depot, and it enabled us to receive and distribute PPE on behalf of the local resilience forum as well as ourselves to many of the facilities around the county that needed PPE. And we had a number of drivers, and still do have a number of drivers, that have been in support of that work from highway services. I'll just do a quick few slides on some of the work we did through partnerships and community engagement. Not so directly related to the environmental work, but certainly a really important work that we've done through our teams in neighbourhoods and climate change. Work that has been supported and operated by many of the staff that we have in our teams. So one of the things that we did very early on in the pandemic and in the lockdown was set up the community hub. The community hub was a mixture of a contact centre where people could ring if they had any issues and they were struggling with anything, whether it be food collection, just even sometimes buying food. In the early weeks of the pandemic, a lot of the supermarkets were struggling to deliver online deliveries, and many people who hadn't used that system before, who found themselves in lockdown, were needing a lot of help with that. So we had the contact centre for that. People could ring us. But also, as part of the hub, we also used our own population health management data to identify people in the county that we thought may need help, either because they were shielding, and of course the shielding was a mixture of national and local data, or because there were people that we knew through our population health management data who may have some difficulties in in getting by during lockdown. So the community hub was something that we set up very early. At one point, we had over 200 volunteers from staff and community services working in the hub. We also created a volunteering unit. One of the things that we had clearly seen through the work of the hub was that there was a huge upswell of communities setting up organisations or refocusing existing organisations to make sure that people in their communities could be helped. But many of those organisations needed just a little bit of extra help, quite often from transport. And I know the two examples we've got on the slide there are where we managed to find other organisations who could help people with transport, be that to deliver food to the vulnerable who couldn't leave the home, or something along those lines. But we did set up the volunteering unit that took in offers from organisations and from members of the public who wanted to help out, and also took in requests from community organisations who were needing help. The idea there being that we could match them as much as we possibly could to help share resources around the county. Also, from the council and the AAP point of view, we put nearly £1.5 million into helping existing and new projects through AAPs, through the voluntary service coming through. Many different projects came through, a lot of which, again, in the early days were food related. These were both emergency food and meals, as we can see on the slide there, but also, again, just people who couldn't access food particularly well. So we really helped an awful lot of people through that AAP funding. AAP boards are now getting back to normal to a certain extent. We have got the COVID-19 recovery as our major priority through AAPs, as members will be well aware. And we will be working through the rest of the year to make sure that that money is spent on a wide range of projects. As we've moved on, some of those emergency responses that we needed during March and April now really have been resolved for the time being. Whether or not we get a second wave or anything that might happen in the future, and we've got an awful lot of learning that we have got from March and April if we do need to do anything like that again. But now we're really looking at the wider recovery programme. Also, just a note on that slide, we do have the Civil Contingency Unit in Neighbourhood and Climate Change. The emergency response really has been coordinated fabulously by that team working with the Local Resilience Forum. So just to get towards a conclusion from me, and I'll be happy to take questions. The big issue now for us is, what does the new normal look like? We still have social distancing to deal with. We still need to be able to keep our staff safe. We're still in a position where, some of those issues I've talked about in terms of refuse collection, the number of people that we have in vehicles together, social distancing, supply chain, they're all still issues that we're dealing with, even though, the recovery activities and the getting back to normal, it really has put a different feel on the way that our society is working again to where we were in lockdown. But things aren't back to normal in terms of our working practices. And, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is we don't really know at this point when they will be back to normal. And we will have to keep adapting and keep changing and keep an eye on the good advice that we get from public health and from others to keep staff safe and to keep our community services going as much as we possibly can. And of course, that includes our own staff, our own jobs, and the local supply chain. We are potentially heading into some very difficult economic times, and the more that we can involve our local supply chain in that to help businesses grow, I think the better. So there's a lot to be grateful for from where we are now. There's a lot to be planning for, but there's also a lot to be considering in terms of where we're going in the future. So I think, Chair, that's probably about it from me. I've probably talked long enough, and I'll be happy to take any questions on any of that.
Many thanks, Alan. I'm sure you'll need a glass of water or certainly some refreshment after that comprehensive report and necessary comprehensive report as well. And I think, as you've indicated previously, that, you know, a lot of thanks have got to go to the staff and the services that's been produced, but also, as you identified there at the end, the community that have been involved throughout this this pandemic. And as we've said, you know, the staff on the front line have really, you know, went the extra mile to ensure that the services they're in the face of the public, if you like, or the public you know, see every day, still continue to function without much of disruption, I might add. And so really it's a matter of thanking those that were on the front line, those who are actually working from home as well. Sometimes those are missed, but you know, they've done a fantastic job. So thanks need to go to the staff with regards to that. Now, as you indicated there, yeah, I'm going to open it up for comments and questions from members. Like I said to members earlier, please use the chat function at the side. I'm going to bring in Councillor Rob Crute first. Rob.
Thank you, Chairman, and again thank you, Alan, for that presentation. There was a lot of detailed information, a lot of vital information, and it's assuring to know that the Neighbourhoods and Climate Change Directorate was ready to step into the breach as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic was declared an emergency. And I'm sure they were able to do that because of the preparation. When you finished your presentation, Alan, you spoke about the uncertainty ahead. And I think, you know, it's important that we bear that in mind. But you also mentioned preparation where possible. And my question's really framed around that. I know that we've done a lot of work during the COVID-19 period in keeping the county ticking over. But how well prepared are we in looking ahead? And I understand, I acknowledge that it's difficult to answer questions like that fully. But you'll know back in March we were looking at a number of issues through this committee, and one of them struck me as a particular priority at the time, and that was the fuel poverty and how it would affect our communities and the people of the county. And we'd looked at in depth really at fuel poverty and how we're looking to mitigate the impacts of fuel poverty across the county through schemes like the Warm Homes campaign. And I'm aware that there was some work due to start during the spring and the summer, working with communities, working with GP practices on trying to spread out that Warm Homes campaign as widely as possible to mitigate the impact of fuel poverty. Do we know if the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted any of those plans, Alan? Because I think we need a reassurance that as we go into the future and the uncertainty that you mentioned yourself, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there'll be a second wave. We don't know if there'll be a particularly harsh winter, or worst of all worlds, there could be both. And I think it's important that we look as closely as we can in preparing for that. And as you said, preparing where possible. How much has the COVID-19 and the work we've done through COVID-19 had an impact on preparing plans for the future?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That is the $64,000 question, isn't it? What is going to happen in the future? I think just to pick up on a couple of the specifics that you raised there, you know, I think some of the work that we've done on, you know, helping homes to become more insulated, to become more energy efficient, that is work that we absolutely will be continuing. And, you know, I did reference some of the climate change emergency response plan projects in the presentation. One of the things we did a very quick stock take on in April, not long after Neighbourhoods and Climate Change came together as a team, was just to do a stock take on that emergency response plan and say, how many of the projects in this response plan that was only approved in February, but February feels like very different times from September, how many of those projects will see significant delays or potential delays because of the pandemic? Very pleased to say that that stocktake really showed that very few of those projects in the long run will have significant delays. And a lot of that is due to the point of which the project was at the time. Unfortunately, some of the ones that were incurring delays were some of the projects where we were needing to either visit properties or interact with communities in some of the way that you've said there about the Warm Homes type initiative, because it simply wasn't something that we could do during the lockdown period. But those plans will be going ahead, absolutely, and that stocktake was very reassuring for me personally, coming into the new team, that those initiatives will still be there. In terms of preparation for some of the issues that might come towards us through winter, one of the things that we have been working at corporately very carefully is how the community hub, or County Durham Together, as we prefer to call it now, will maintain the important work that it's been doing. And right at the very start of this session, one of the things I mentioned was that we should be, incredibly grateful to the staff, not only for continuing existing services, but also in some cases developing, devising and almost inventing new services that this pandemic has created a need for. And the County Durham Together hub is definitely one of those. We are very conscious now that what we don't want to do and what we aren't doing, just to give members reassurance, is that we are not just dismantling that whole architecture that we've created to help our communities during the pandemic, but we are keeping that, and we are keeping that running, and we're trying to make sure that it will be able to address some of the issues that we might be facing in winter, and some of the issues that we might be facing again from a community point of view as the furlough scheme comes to an end, because we don't know what the impact of that is going to be, and we're not even sure of the certainties around that, but we do know that it might have an impact on many people in our communities, so we want to have that ability to be able to respond very quickly to the things that are coming at us.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Rob, for your question. Obviously, in relation to works continually going on, for reports to come back to this committee, it may end up being in a briefing note, and we are aware that the various departments and sectors that we deal with will keep us up to date in terms of the progress of future works going on within the council, and members will be kept aware of what's going on in those areas. I've got two other speakers to come in. First of all, Liz Madison.
Thank you, Chair. Liz Madison from Spennymoor Middleston Division. First of all, I would like to thank the many frontline workers that have operated during this very strange period. They've done an excellent job, and locally I can only commend the work that's been done. But I would also like to put my appreciation to the senior leadership teams that have been involved with all of the planning behind the scenes. And I do know that a lot of them have worked 7 days a week. And I think for that they should be commended with the way that the whole COVID situation has been developed. So thank you for that. In regard to the Junction 61, the work that's been done there, there has been very little disruption to traffic along that. I've gone along that many times. And I would like to thank all of the highways teams that have been involved with that particular project. I think it's been tremendously excellent job. I would like to ask, and I have raised this question previously as regard to the economic situation. In regard to the Amazon, on the programming of it, there has been facilities for buses to operate there, but has there now been something transpired with the bus companies themselves in order to bring people to this site. A lot of people are actually without transport and rely on public, and I think this is a good opportunity to improve the economic well-being for a lot of residents if that could be put in place. Thank you.
Alan, do you have the appropriate information to answer that question?
Well, yeah, thanks for the comments, Liz. Very, very much appreciated there. On that particular question about the bus service and the Amazon site, I don't have that information with me at the minute. I'm very happy to find that out for you and come back to you with that. But yeah, sorry, I don't have that information at hand just now.
Thanks, Alan. I'm sure that information will be disseminated to yourself, Liz, and to the committee for your question. Thank you for that. Over to Councillor Stuart Dunn.
Hello, yes, I'm Councillor Stuart Dunn from Coxhoe Division. Unfortunately, Liz has just stolen quite a lot of my thunder. I also want to place on record my thanks to officers for the way they have coordinated the response across COVID-19. There have been an awful lot of people in need and an awful lot of vulnerable people, and the way Durham County Council has responded and supported the most vulnerable people has been outstanding, and I think that is recognised by an awful lot of people. The wide range of services that Durham County Council provides very, very well, and the extra mile that it's gone in the COVID-19 situation. It has been an outstanding response which people have appreciated. Of course, Junction 61 is in my division, and like Liz, I've been watching works on it carefully. I'd like to place on record my thanks to the team. The way that the work has progressed with minimal disruption for such a massive scheme. It's introduced 2 new roundabouts and put an additional lane onto a motorway intersection that hasn't stopped. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I don't think people understand the complexity of working on that junction whilst the junction has still been operating. It is a very, very busy junction, and that has allowed Amazon to open absolutely on time as it planned on the day that it opened, and it is now recruiting over 1,000 full-time people and 2,000 full-time equivalents. In response to Liz, that this is something which Councillor Maura McKean and I have taken an interest in on the bus situation. There have been discussions with the bus operators about extending services into Amazon, but also once the staff are recruited, Amazon actually putting on bus services to collect people and take them to where they are, rather than needing to bring cars. So I'm interested to see the spread of people, where they come from. Obviously, I'm hoping a lot will come from Coxhoe and Bowburn, but if they come wider afield, that bus services are provided to get them to and from work with minimum environmental impact. So I'll close there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. So no direct question to Alan on that issue. That's fine. Thank you. And thanks for your comments as well. I now have Charlie Kay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Charlie Kay, Camden Division. I echo what my colleagues have said previously, but there's no need for me to repeat them, except to say that for me, the one thing that has really impressed me in the way DCC have delivered services during the lockdown is the domestic waste collection, because not only did we see a dramatic increase in green waste, obviously with people literally on gardening leave, obviously if you're at home more of the time, you generate more general waste. And I can speak for the crews that operate in the Bishop Auckland area, and I was absolutely staggered in the way that nothing was too much for them. People were generating more waste than they could get in a bin. They didn't leave it. They just thought, we're operating in exceptional times, and they responded accordingly. And I would like, to put on record my appreciation of the way they've kept the streets clean, if you like. And one direct question to Alan, though, being a little parochial. The Witton Bridge, Alan, it's a major crossing for the south of the county. and I'm wondering, do we have a timescale on when it will be reopened? And when it is reopened, will it now be a twin deck? Will it be a twin lane bridge, or will it still be single carriageway? I'll just mute myself so you can answer.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for the compliments on the waste collection. Yeah, you know, we were operating in difficult times, and many waste streams saw a dramatic increase during the time. And you know, the new arrangements that we put in place had to deal with that. You know, just issues like with pubs and restaurants being closed, there was an awful lot more glass to collect from the home because people were tending to stay in a lot more. And you know, recycling went up by 20%, but a lot of that weight was green bottles for people when they were staying in and not going out. So there was a real change in the waste streams that we saw, as well as, you know, just really having to keep those services going. On the Witton Park Bridge, if you don't mind, I think if Brian Buckley is still on the call, he might be the best person to give you a lot more detail on Witton Park Bridge, being the expert in that area. I can't see Brian on my screen, but I think he is still on the call.
He is still on the call as far as I can see. Yeah.
Good
Brian,
morning.
would you like to come in?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Brian Buckley, Strategic Highways Manager. Charlie, yes, as you know, the bridge scheme is ongoing at the moment. The first stage of the scheme was the demolition of the existing bridge before we go in and put the new bridge in place. We're at that stage now where the demolition is complete and we're about to start the construction works on site. We are using the existing supports for the bridge, so there's no scope there to significantly widen it for two-way traffic. But there are some improvements there to the bridge. And in terms of timescales, we're aiming for an autumn completion. So, you know, October time we should be completed there.
Cycle lane would be nice, Brian.
Sorry, a cycle lane, yeah.
Cycle lane would be nice.
Yeah. It's low traffic volumes down there, Charlie, as we know. So
yeah,
the best thing we can do is get that bridge replaced. It's a £2.5 million scheme. And yeah, we'll crack on with that and get it to its completion as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I've got no other requests to speak. Is that correct? Okay. If I've got no one else wishing to speak, again, just to like to thank Alan and again Brian, yourselves for the excellent work and for the presentation today. Really shows the committee the extent of the work that we're actually doing on this committee, and a lot of key functions there as well. Okay, point members then to the recommendations on page 27. One, that we note the content of the report, and that we receive a further update on the response to the pandemic in future. Members agree to that? Thank you.
Agree.
Agreed.
Okay, moving on then to item 7, the refresh of the work programme 2020-2021 for the Scrutiny Committee. The work programme is attached as Appendix 2. You'll see again on page 59 to page 80 on the agenda. And it's, I think we're having, just to let you know, I think Diane, our committee officer, is having problems with connection, and I can't see her on the screen. So I think it's going to be Anne or Tom are actually going to be carrying on with this particular part of the work programme.
Thanks, Chair. And currently, sort of, it's fine. And now start off. It's Diane Close, Overview and Scrutiny Officer here this morning, members. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you. The report before the committee this morning asks that members consider and agree the proposed work programme for the Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is attached as Appendix 2 to the report. The proposed work programme is designed to be flexible to accommodate items that may arise during the life of the work programme, but it also provides the opportunity for the committee to respond to any further issues resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, I would just like to highlight that there are various requirements in relation to virtual meetings, and in responding to these requirements, including fewer overview and scrutiny committees scheduled in the current corporate committee diary in which to deliver our proposed work programme, the chair and vice chair felt that it was important that it is prioritised, clearly identifying those items to be discussed in formal committee and those items which it is thought could be considered by members via a briefing report which will be sent out, with members having the opportunity to ask questions which will subsequently be responded to by the relevant service grouping. In addition, just to highlight, it is still proposed that the committee will continue to receive the quarterly performance and budget reports at formal meetings of the committee. Moving on to Appendix 2, this clearly sets out the proposed work programme, which includes items which the committee had already identified for inclusion when you were delivering your work programme in 2019-20, together with any new areas which have been identified, such as the impact of COVID-19 in relation to the service grouping. In addition, members will be able to see that Appendix 2 clearly identifies those agenda items proposed for discussion in formal committee and those proposed to be delivered via a briefing note. Members are asked to receive and comment on the proposed work programme and to agree the work programme as attached at Appendix 2 with the flexibility that it offers to respond to emerging issues. Thanks, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks again, Diane. Your connectivity was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Diane's explained there, in relation to the work programme, it's difficult to fit everything in that we would like to fit in this year, bearing in mind that we actually lost one of our earlier meetings that should have taken place in July, which didn't help that current situation. So the only meeting that we have left for this particular year is one in November, where we'll be discussing a number of items. And as Diane's indicated, that from January onwards, that is pretty flexible in terms, or fluid, I should say, not flexible, should be fluid in terms of what we can actually put on the agendas, dependent on how the COVID pandemic plays out. So it's very much open at this moment in time. So I shall open this up to any questions. And I'm just checking my list here. I've got Councillor Stewart Dunn. Over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the updated programme. I reflect on Alan's comments earlier in response to Rob Crute's question about the ongoing activity on climate change, which hasn't been adversely affected. Really pleased to hear that. But I note that on page 71, it's not proposed that we have a full discussion of this again until March 2021. I note what the officers just said, that we will get briefing notes, but I would ask if it would be possible to consider also including an update on the climate response in the next meeting, the November meeting, in addition to the March meeting, please.
Thanks, Stuart, for your question, and again, thanks for the heads up. Initially asking that question through an email. Our officers have actually contacted the service in relation to that, and at this moment in time they have indicated that there is clearly a briefing document could be forwarded in the earlier days. At this moment in time, we haven't been able to manage and put that into the November meeting. However, we may be able to bring it forward to January, but our officers are working behind the scenes to try and rearrange the programme. Bear in mind that obviously over this pandemic period, officers have been working very hard behind the scenes to make sure members are kept up to date what's going on. Plus also the officers involved in the climate emergency, as Alan indicated, have been involved in other aspects as well, so it's not been as easy to put formal reports forward on a regular basis on that, although there is clearly information available. And I know Councillor John Clare has also, our climate change champion, has also responded to you in relation to some work that is going on at this moment in time, some very important work that's going on with regards to the plan going forward. But we shall work very hard to try and get you as much information as possible. It's still a key priority, but obviously, as you understand, COVID is still a priority at this moment in time, and it's difficult to relax the COVID process until we're really sure it's gone behind us, if you like. Dan, do you want to fill in anything else, or does that cover it?
Thanks, Chair. No, just to say, going forward, and we still don't know the number of meetings that we may have between January to April. But certainly, and we do have both the climate response and the carbon management plan highlighted as priorities, and have been talking to staff about getting a briefing report out to members as soon as possible, and also looking at how we may possibly bring it to a sooner meeting rather than leaving it to the March meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dan. Does that satisfy your question, Stuart?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for that. I have one more speaker. Tom Bolton, please.
Hi, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's about page 70 in the annex, which refers to fuel poverty. I was wondering if that information could also include some references to the recently announced government scheme, the Green Energy Scheme. It would be interesting. I know I had a look on the website the other day, and it takes you, I think, first to the local schemes that are available. So they'll be the county schemes, county-wide schemes. But I think it would be helpful also to have some sort of inclusion in that note about what's the new schemes nationally, if that's possible, please.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, I think that should be possible. I'm sure the officers will look into that. It's important that we do have the latest information from government on that.
Thanks very much.
Diane, did you want to come back?
Yes, please, Chair. And just to confirm that we have actually spoken to Cliff Duff and asked Cliff to ensure that he includes reference to this scheme. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dan. Have no one else requested to speak? Okay, so again, moving on then. Thank you very much, members, to your questions on the work programme. Like I said, it is difficult times. We are trying to manage it the best way possible, and hopefully the briefing notes will also provide us the additional information that we require to make sure that the services are being managed efficiently and effectively. Okay, so we have recommendations on page 60 of the report, where we receive and comment on the proposed work programme and agree to the work programme for 2021 as attached in the Appendix 2, and that the flexibility it offers to respond to emerging issues. Hopefully the members all agree to those recommendations. Thank you. Okay, item number 8 then, any other business. I've not been informed of any other business, therefore that concludes today's meeting, and just leaves me to thank you all for participating in this meeting this morning, and wish you all the best for the next few days and the weekend ahead. Thank you very much.